Hello and welcome to the Unusual Stories podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we start, may I just remind you, if you find this podcast entertaining, useful, in any way, shape or form, valuable, then please follow the podcast either on your, Spotify or YouTube, wherever you're watching it. Subscribe. It goes a long way. It makes the podcast grow. It helps me in growing the podcast. And most importantly, it allows people to see it more often. And so if you do believe it's something valuable, then, I would be very grateful if you do. If you'd like to support the podcast in any other way, maybe by sending me a little email or funding one of my coffees that keep me going, then please follow the link below as well. There are many options out there, and share it with a friend. I think that's the word of mouth as the power of marketing is definitely one of those that goes a long way. So I am very, very grateful for all of you who are already subscribing, listening, sharing it with others, commenting, and even sending me some messages. I greatly appreciate it. So thank you so much for that. And thanks for being here. It's a pleasure as per usual. So in terms of the episode itself, what we're going to talk about today will not be an easy topic, right? So I feel this might be yet again one of those books and one of those topics that will challenge me and challenge my skills of articulating myself well, and hopefully not only challenge my way of thinking about the world, but also challenge your thinking and your way of approaching these topics. So it's not a pleasant book, and many of the topics we'll discuss today would probably not be considered pleasant. If pleasance is what you're looking for, then maybe this is not the right podcast for you. But I would urge you to stay, and I would urge you to listen, to be open, to challenge whatever you think is not right. And most importantly, I would urge you to doubt. And this will be a big part of this episode for sure. Being able to know what you don't know and being able to doubt and challenge what you think is not true. So the book that we'll discuss today is called The Parasitic Mind, and its author is Dr. Gad Saad. The context may be just a little one, a brief one that I've taken a note here for you, is the book was written during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's one important thing maybe to note. It gives you the context of in what circumstance the author wrote these words. And secondly, Dr. Saad is a psychologist, used to teach at university, and he observed what happened at universities and what started to happen at universities in the recent years, and that troubled him deeply. And this is this book is a sort of, maybe in a way, a critique of and a growth of postmodern thought and overtaking of postmodernism, especially through educational facilities, but not only so. So in terms of the context, it's interesting because, as you might remember, my podcast started during the pandemic as well. And that's interesting. It seems to me that the pandemic overall has been a kind of a moment in our recent, existent years that either made or broken some of our ways of thinking and some of our attitudes. For myself, as I already explained to you a couple of times, the pandemic was actually quite a pleasant time Of course, there were some challenges, and I did not enjoy the stress and worrisome atmosphere surrounding my friends and family members. But in terms of my time for myself and my self-development, it was probably one of the richer and more interesting times. I've had much more time to do what I want with my time, most importantly, and I've had many opportunities to challenge my way of thinking, which allowed me to not only start a podcast and start reading more books and even write a book, but also it allowed me to rethink what was important for me in my life. So, maybe this is slightly beside the point, but for me, it seems like it's an informing feature of this book that it was written during the pandemic, and it's what spanned Dr. Saad to be somewhat a controversial figure, which if you do look him up, I do not think there is much controversy there, but for reasons that we will discuss in this episode, he might have been considered one back then. So let's dive straight into it. Funnily enough, if you observe the way my podcasts are structured recently, the majority of episodes have like 3 major topics that we explore. For this particular book, I couldn't decide on 3, so instead I created 5. Some of them are somewhat interlinked, so we'll sort of, meander between them. But I felt like there is so much to be said here, and I didn't want to do it half-heartedly. I wanted to deliver to you a message that is hopefully, open-minded and mind-opening. So I've created 5 separate, let's say, but intertwined topics that we'll explore. So let's start with truth versus hurt feelings, and this is somewhat of a start to the book itself as well. First, a quote from Confucius. "To know what you know and what you don't know, that is the true knowledge." So, we've already discussed it a couple of times, right? Ignorance ain't bliss. It's just lack of knowing what you don't know. And quite frankly, knowing anything, if you are an extremely ignorant person. But this idea that true knowledge lies in knowing the limits of our knowledge as well as knowing what we know is an interesting and I think a good starting point to this conversation. We will dive into truth again and again over this episode, and the book itself is very, very firmly grounded in this idea that the truth shall set you free, and there is nothing but the truth that is of value in terms of ideas and discussion about them. This is not to say that the discussion of the ideas and exploring different ideas is not valuable. Rather, there is inherent value in truth in and of itself. And obviously, the antithesis of truth is a lie. And whether you're aware that you're not telling the truth or not is somewhat irrelevant in this battleground of ideas. So, as you might have noted, the title of the book is The Parasitic Mind. And this is for a reason that apparently, according to Dr. Saad, mind viruses are very similar to viruses and bacteria we deal with every day on a biological level. The only, let's say, difference here is that mind viruses affect the mind. And throughout the book, the author points out different examples of viruses, not only biological, but also sort of neurological, that are participating in this wonderful and complex world of ours. And one quote from this part is, "Mind viruses destroy truth in order to ascertain and defend ideologies of which they stem. So an important feature of a virus is that whether it's a parasite or a different type of a virus, is that the main goal of any, quite frankly, living organism is to propagate its species, right? So it wants to survive and then propagate, create new offshoots of itself. So a parasite, for example, might be one that not only maybe steals some of the energy and nutrients of its host, but also ultimately aims to either propagate across the host's body or somehow get itself and its children, in a way, out there into the world. And the goal there is to maintain in itself, right? Allow itself to survive. And that survival is either done by surviving itself or by allowing its offspring to survive. And in terms of mind viruses, so ideas that might affect our thinking, our way of being, our way of thinking, our way of acting, their goal is also to ascertain themselves and to defend ideologies of which they stem. For example, if an idea is based on the fact that there is gravity, then for you to take that idea down, to wipe it off, the most efficient way to go about it would be to find proof that gravity does not exist. Since the foundation is no longer there, you can take off all the other parts that are built on that foundation. And in a similar manner, if you are discussing with someone something and you don't agree with them, if you want to prove your point and prove that they are wrong, the best way to go about it, not to say this is the easy way, but the best way to go about it would be to prove to them and to the wider audience, if it's in front of the audience, that the foundations on which their idea is built are untrue, right? So, there are some, you could consider it to be like a layered cake maybe, or a building, truly, that over time, if the foundation is strong, over time more and more ideas can be built upon it. And so obviously over time the structure itself becomes a stronger one, because if every and each of those new ideas built upon the foundation ascertains the foundation to be true, then over time this foundation becomes even stronger. This is not to say that it's always true, though. An interesting quote, or maybe a phrase that I've heard again and again, and I've already discussed it with you before, is this idea that a lie repeated 1,000 times becomes the truth. And this is not to say that it becomes the objective and true truth. Rather, if you repeat again and again a faulty idea, with time, unfortunately, this idea can become a part of our perception, even though it is untrue. And in a similar manner, it will take repeat of a true idea again and again for a long, long time until this also becomes let's say, a popular thought. So if you think about our thought patterns as waves, and maybe the society as the ocean, over time these waves come over the ocean again and again and flow by, and obviously can affect some of us. And the author of the book points out that mind viruses are as real as other viruses. They just affect our society and our culture rather than our physical body, maybe. So I hope you remember the episode about Thinking Fast and Slow, the book by Daniel Kahneman. In that book, he, with his co-author, he points out two systems of thought, right? The system one and system two, the fast and the slow thinking. So this is re-ascertained in the book The Parasitic Mind by the author and sort of portrayed in this way. You have the cognitive thinking, which is the rational thought, the logical, and then you have the affective system thinking, which is the emotional thought, right? So one of these is fast, and that's the emotional, and one of these is slow, and that's the rational. Usually, maybe a best way to describe it or to portray it is when you're trying to figure out an answer to a very difficult question. If you're doing it during an exam, even though you might be quite emotional about that exam, your thinking will be most likely driven by this rational cognitive state, right? You're logically working through the example, trying to find the right answer. It is a very different situation if you're having a heated discussion with a friend, or even worse, someone not friendly to you at all, when it is your emotional, your affective, your fast system that is playing the main, the main role in that discourse. And obviously, you can sometimes even say, you can sometimes tell when you're observing some discussion taking place, whether the person is actually discussing from a logical or from the emotional standpoint. You know, oftentimes the crowd is what the emotional is like. Apparently, there is this phenomena happening that in a crowd, people act much more violently than they would ever do on their own. And, probably one of the aspects of this is obviously that in a crowd, you're one of many, so you're much more difficult to be noticed. But also, it might just be that the energy of the crowd exaggerates your emotions, and obviously if you see someone do something, that might enhance your ability and likelihood of doing that as well, which is a dangerous part of groupthink and crowd thinking, I guess. So the problem with these two systems is that a wrong choice of a system from which you act will result in wrong conclusions, right? For example, a big part of political discourse is the emotional, even though the decision for whom should we vote is likely to be much better if it were logical. So, I can imagine you, because I know myself, I've been a victim of this a couple of times before, that because of my affect against one of the political, let's say, representatives, or maybe against, or maybe for one of the political parties rather than the other, I fail to observe the logical parts of their arguments and focus on the emotional. And obviously this is something that the media greatly plays upon when giving you what to think. There is this old adage from journalism: if it bleeds, it leads. And the idea obviously is that whatever is most shocking is likely to draw attention of ours. And this makes sense, Why wouldn't it draw your attention if it's shocking, since it straight away, shoots into the brain this ideas of fear and danger. And obviously our probably greatest instinct is that of self-preservation. We are most likely to react to things events, people that are threatening to us, simply because it sort of threatens all the other parts, right? If the foundation of my life is my life, then I don't really care that much about all the other parts of my life, all the other layers, if you're threatening this foundation in and of itself, because once that is gone, everything else is wiped out. And this is a huge problem in terms of debates and in terms of political discourse. We've talked about this before, like if you allow your emotions to take hold of you whenever you are listening to an opponent, or maybe whenever you're having a discussion with someone about a topic that you feel really strongly emotionally about, you're unlikely to see their point of view or to even truly understand what they're saying, simply because your emotions are an obstacle to that. And apparently, according to Gad Saad, the problem that the universities, in his view, are struggling with nowadays is that the driving model of universities is no longer the pursuit of truth, but defense of hurt feelings. So this emphasis on emotion rather than the logic, right? One would want to think, I truly do want to think, that scientists in this world, those that we call experts, are driven by the logic and the pursuit of truth. I don't want to go to the doctor who's motivated by emotional attachment to some disease when he's diagnosing me, right? Like, if I'm going to an expert to ask whether or not I am at risk of having cancer, I'd rather have a logically driven doctor look through my some sort of tests and so forth when he does his research, rather than emotionally being attached to, for example, an idea that there is no such thing as cancer at this age. So this topic obviously is much deeper in the book itself, and I don't want to spoil too much of the fun. I did enjoy the book, although it was not an easy read. But realizing this as a start point of our conversation today, that there seems to be, or at least that's what Mr. Saad observed, there seems to be a movement from objective truth seeking to emotional defense mechanism, in a way, in the universities, and not only in the media. I think that's a big part of it. In politics, unfortunately, even in national health and international health policies, these tendencies are something that the author points out as rather dangerous. And in a way, he calls it the mind virus of our day and age. Now, let's consider for a moment the problem of postmodernism, because this is basically the wave of cultural, let's say, shift that is definitely at the root, and maybe a root cause to these troubles of bad ideas. So, according to the author, postmodernism states that nothing is objective, no truth is objective truly, and all knowledge is relative. So, in a way, it is all up to the subjective experience of a person whether something is true or not, and in a way, there is no true one knowledge, which potentially we could, on the surface, consider to be quite an open-minded idea, right? Like, we are open and tolerant to all. We accept all views and opinions. That sounds like a free speech activist kind of an idea. The problem, though, with this postmodern thought is that the goal of it is to free us from reality, which can lead to all kinds of delusion and illusion. So think about it. If if at the basis of your understanding of the world is this idea that the world is a sphere and there is gravity that holds us sort of grounded, and you're likely to fall if you jump off of the window, and you're likely to die if you do it from a high enough floor, then these two facts, let's say, if they are contended, if for whatever reason you find someone that through their postmodern thought frees you from your reality, saying that that's actually not true, and it's only a subjective perception that there is gravity, and it's only a subjective opinion that if you jump off of the window from 4 stories down, you will die, then wouldn't that potentially be at risk of causing you or someone else to try it out, maybe even for the sake of proving the point, and in the in the outcome of it all, die? Obviously, this is a somewhat of an absurd example, right? Because this might just be where our self-preservation comes into play. I hope it would. And you would not risk your life to prove a point by jumping off of the window. But if you do consider these mind viruses to be strong enough to lead us astray, then why wouldn't this idea be an example that is a somewhat of a true one, right? Like, these are just examples, obviously, but I don't think you have to look far across your current culture in either your country or in the world at large to find ideas that are dangerous and that are actually causing harm and potentially even killing people as we speak, even though they might sound rather absurd to you. Maybe because you know they are untrue, but the whole problem of a mind virus is that once you become a host to this parasite, you're unlikely to know you are a host to this parasite. One of the features of a parasite that is inherent in its ability to be a parasite is to hide itself, so the host cannot, sort of take it out. Now, if you're listening to this with your child, then please ask them to cover their ears, because there is a swear word coming. But this is a quote from the book itself. "People get swayed by bullshit when they don't understand what is said, but perceive the speaker as authority." And this is a huge problem, a huge part of postmodern thought that is also, according to the author, the problem at universities especially, that in postmodern ideas there is often a space for someone with authority, trusting the experts, as they say, telling you something that you cannot understand, and since you assume that authority figure to be right, and you have no way of understanding because maybe you've not done your homework, so you have no way of understanding what they are trying to tell you, you believe them and you assume that what they're saying is true. And obviously this opens a gateway to all kinds of chicanery and charlatans, right? Like, even right now, as I speak to you, there is a risk that because maybe you've listened to me for a while and you do consider me to be somewhat of an authority figure, and maybe you hope, you believe that I have good intentions, you might be more likely to accept what I'm telling you without challenging it, simply because you have this emotional attachment to my perception, my perspective. And of course, in many situations, in many circumstances in our life, we will be at the mercy of our authority figures, and not always can we be fully bulletproof, right? But a big part, I believe, of becoming a stronger, more worldly and more able person in this world is to strive to understand what others are saying and strive to understand even just a little the topic before you take anyone's word as true. And it applies both to your teachers, both to your colleagues at work, as well as your spouse, as well as the politicians, especially the politicians, I would say, and as well entertainers and all kinds of, people, including myself, that speak to you and with you. Because, a good example of this, this problem and also this solution, I guess, is I've had a discussion with my friend a while back about personal finance, right? And I remember I think he just inherited a big amount of money from one of his dead relatives, and there came a point when he sort of he was thinking what to do about this money, and after a while he shared with me that after a few weeks that he went to a financial advisor, right, to seek help. And it's great, I do believe there is an inherent value in financial advisory, and for what it's worth, I'm even training to become an accountant. So in a way, one could assume that I do believe my profession in progress to be a useful one. The problem is, though, I asked him, does he know anything about personal finance, or does he have any goals or ideas of what the financial advisor is likely to tell him to do? And for what it's worth, his answer was a strong no. He said that he doesn't really care about money that much. He doesn't know much about finance, and this is I would say a big problem of majority of us, that there are areas of expertise in our life that we simply don't know anything or much about. Up until a few years ago, I didn't really know much about finance or money at all. Now, thanks to self-education and my experiences, I would say that I'm quite well prepared for a meeting with a financial advisor. And why is it important? It's important because if you know what advice looks like, what good advice might look like, and what the goal of this person might be, you're much more likely to gain the benefits of meeting an expert without hurting yourself and having to suffer the side effects potential of their chicanery, if there was one. So, on the example of my friend, if you go to a financial advisor not knowing at all how money works, how the stock market works, or anything, then depending on that financial advisor's moral virtues and their attitude, they might help you secure your wealth, or they might scam you, right? And the opportunity is there, especially if you're ignorant enough to not see it coming. This is the problem, and I would say it's very much so a problem with the medical establishment as well. And this is a greater trouble because it's much more difficult to understand the workings of our body than it is to understand the workings of the stock market, I would say, from experience. So, this is not to say that you should become an expert on everything. You cannot be an expert on every little thing simply because you don't have enough time and resources, and it would be a waste of your time to study medicine for 5 years only to know whether or not to trust your doctor. But we should, exactly because of this, be ready to challenge and be open-minded enough to discuss the different ideas and facts about the world and not simply take everything at its face value, especially if it's said by someone that we don't trust. Trust is inherent in this, and so this is also why it's such a big problem if the trust that you've had for maybe your doctor or your spouse or your financial advisor or your government is strained. It's very difficult to rebuild it, right? There is a saying, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but it says something like, it only takes one situation, one trouble to break the trust that it took years to build. It's much easier to strain your relationship than to make it better. And this is for a reason, we're risk averse. We don't want to be around people that wish us bad. And so a big alarm bell goes on inside our head or heart or soul, whatever you consider, when someone is unfaithful or untrue with us, or dishonest, or just tricks us. This is a big problem. Now, apparently, in terms of postmodern thought, which thrives in gibberish and impossibility of understanding, this is exactly how you become a victim of it. If you trust the expert, if you don't know what they're saying, and if you're so emotionally attached to that person, organization, idea, that you're unlikely to hear any criticism of it, this is when you become a victim, or when you are likely to become a victim of these ideas and actually suffer their side effects or negative consequences. And very interesting quote by Voltaire here that I would like to finish this part of our episode with is, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." So those who can make you believe crazy stuff can make you commit very bad stuff. And, a big part of this is obviously the emotional drive that movements in culture and in societies take on nations even, if you think about the Second World War and the rise of Hitler to power, a huge part of his rise to power, and then obviously the dismay of both Jewish nationality and all the other victims of the Third Reich, was a part that, to begin with, and each one by themselves, the Germans were not evil, essentially as people. Through charisma and ideas and grandeur and many other aspects of Hitler's leadership, a country of people that probably in and of themselves were not likely to commit atrocities ended up killing millions and basically committing crime against humanity that was not seen before to that scale. Similarly, in the Soviet Russia, we've discussed the book Gulag Archipelago, where Solzhenitsyn points out that it all starts with small truths becoming sort of intertwined with small lies, and then in a totalitarian state without free speech, and where everyone lies and where everyone tells on everyone else, the country falls into a hell, and apparently hell is a bottomless pit. And so one could argue that it is similarly the person who commits a crime as well as that person who looks away in the moment of that crime being committed or that lie being said, that is as guilty of this corruption of truth or this crime. Obviously, this is an extreme approach, but I would argue that one should become a free speech absolutist, and this is where we're going next. So now let's talk about the problem of self-censorship, because and this I'm very hopeful that now the tide is turning, and that this episode comes at a time when we no longer have to worry as much as before about being cancelled for saying things that apparently offend some. But it certainly is a problem, and always will be, that stems from cultural pressure and fear of being left out, right? We are inherently social creatures, and so we need one another. We, back in the day when we were living in tribes or in packs like wolves, if the tribe were to kick you out, you were very unlikely to survive. The world was much more dangerous place. And in a similar manner nowadays, apparently, especially over the past few years, as you've observed, maybe there seems to be this cancel culture now, maybe at its demise, hopefully, that would lead to people being ostracized and kicked out of the society effectively for saying things that were not in line with either the governmental narrative or maybe with the societal norm. And obviously this is a dangerous idea, simply because the moment there is no free speech, it's whoever has the greatest stick, or whoever has the biggest media channel who decides what can or cannot be said. And that is how totalitarian states are formed. Quite frankly, I am slightly, if not more, worried about what is happening across a few different countries around the Western sphere, where it seems like you can be prosecuted for a post on social media, or maybe saying something that offends someone else in your country or other country, which sounds very much so like 1984 Orwellian totalitarian state. Actually, I will make a few episodes about Orwell's works, and my brother made me realize that I've not done either Aldous Huxley's Brave New World or Orwell's Animal Farm or 1984. So we will definitely discuss that in the coming weeks or months. I'll have to probably revisit those books first. But let's think about this one now. So first of all, throughout the book, Mr. Saad points out few examples of how free speech was attacked. The idea of free speech was attacked, and how he and his peers actually fell victims to this trouble. So Joe Rogan, who has the Joe Rogan podcast, was criticized and sort of tried to be cancelled during the pandemic when he observed that ivermectin is apparently a good medicine to fend off the COVID-19 troubles. Gad Saad, so the author, was criticized when he spoke out about free speech on campuses and universities, and this was ultimately what led to him writing this book in the first place. And Jordan Peterson, about whom we've spoke so much on this podcast, he was criticized and effectively attempted to be cancelled when he spoke out about the Bill C-16 in Canada, which he perceived to be a negative and basically to the detriment of free speech in a society. So I don't want to delve deeper into those. These are just examples. You can research and listen or read about them on your own. But the point I'm maybe trying to make here is that even those individuals who are probably powerful and big enough in terms of their experience and channels. Obviously, three of them actually, all of them have their podcasts and quite successful ones. I will link below to each of them. I'll just take a note of that straight away. Obviously one could argue that if you are big enough in terms of your success and recognition in the world, you're much more difficult to be cancelled, and that's probably true. Nevertheless, though, this societal and cultural wave of basically free speech obstruction seems to be a trouble for all. And, I particularly wanted to talk about this because, quite frankly, I have these discussions with myself from time to time, right? Obviously, with a few controversial books I've shared with you at the end of last year, I did talk about my worries that there are some topics and some ideas that I still think I cannot fully explore, which on one hand makes me feel really little and weak. On the other, makes me think I'm, maybe doing myself and my loved ones a favor simply not to place myself in the limelight of scandal, which is simply just not something I strive for. I think it's to the detriment of all parties. I am, though, I am definitely of the idea that free speech, above all, is what allows us humans to exchange ideas and to be human. The moment we stop a discourse, the moment we stop discussing these topics, maybe especially the ones that cause us some trouble and internal turmoil, we stop being civilized in a sense of being able to talk rather than fight. A first step of resolving an issue is likely to be a discussion. If you're straight away jumping to each other's throats, then you're not much of a civilized person, I would say. And the author points out this free speech absolutism idea and says that if an idea is true, it will withstand jokes about it. So he highlights the need for comics and our need to be able to laugh at ourselves. And this is a huge thing, if you observe in the media, there have been some topics over the past years, and still are, that are simply not to be laughed at. And I would argue that if you're inclined to criticize someone for making a joke about something because you feel uncomfortable with it, then you should check yourself, because that's exactly how this idea becomes a danger to freedom of both yourself and that other person. Because freedom of speech goes both ways, right? If I am free to say what I think, you are free to say what you think. The moment I am not free to say what I think, because of maybe you putting me in custody, putting me in prison for it, then who is it to say that in a few years' time you will not join me in that same prison simply because someone else points out your ideas as, unequal, right? So the quote here is, once we limit what we satire, we no longer live in a free society. And this is a huge thing. I think this might just be the biggest point the book has to say about our attitude. It certainly did touch me deeply that, I should be able to laugh at myself and at my troubles and at, the challenges of life. The moment I don't allow myself or others to laugh at these, I become a victim to this totalitarian attitude of the ego. And in the grander scheme of things, if you look at a nationality or a nation or a company, if there are topics that are taboo, then these topics are somewhat of a canary in a coal mine, signaling that there is a trouble in the culture of that company or nationality or the state that should be addressed, or it will grow to our all detriment. Now, to drive this point even further, there is this idea that ideas are the greatest battleground. So this is where our civilization thrives, and this is how we've become much better and basically the apex predators and the apex decision makers on the planet, that we could discuss with our fellow peers how we will hunt the mammoth before we went to hunt the mammoth, while the mammoths could only communicate between themselves what was happening in that moment. They could not abstractly plan how to defend themselves from humans coming to get them. A quote here from George R. R. Martin that I wanted to share with you is, most men would rather deny a hard truth than face it. And here I would like to point out this idea that a true friendship, should be anti-fragile. So even though you might not want to hear something, it is your friends, your true friends or your spouse's obligation to say it if it's for your benefit. I would argue that criticism, as long as its root is in good intention, is essential to our growth. I should be able to accept, hear, and learn, and most importantly, listen to the criticism of my own, of my person or of my actions by those around me. Because this is how we grow, this is how we self-correct, this is how we check ourselves against our biases and attitudes and ego-driven actions. And to speak the truth is to take risks. It takes courage to say what you think. And if you have a healthy relationship with the other person, then it will also take courage to hear what they have to say. But in the long run, the truth shall set you free. This is truly what I believe to be the case. And an interesting quote here that I've written down from Henry Thomas Buckle is about the ideas as the ultimate battleground. So Henry Thomas Buckle said, "Men and women range themselves in 3 classes or orders of intelligence. You can tell the lowest class by their having to always talk about persons. The next, by their habit of always conversing about things. And the highest, by their preference of discussion of ideas." And I would urge you to have those deep, meaningful conversations about ideas with others. I would urge you to stop talking behind people's backs about people, and maybe refrain from talking too much about things and events. And I want to strive for that as well. And even for what it's worth, this is hopefully what I'm doing here by discussing these ideas with you through this podcast, and in a way discussing them with myself, because this is ultimately what a monologue is. And free speech above all, right? It's one of those things. I would urge you to defend people's free speech at all cost. One important thing here to note before we go into our last topic is that it is very normal for us to judge. A big part of this movement of ideas over the past few years has been placed on the emphasis of non-judgmentalism, right? Like tolerance for all and not judging at all what others say, do, think, and stuff like that. Unless you're on the censorship front, which is an irony. But it is important for us to note that it's completely normal to judge. We judge all the time. I'm currently judging the way I say these things. I'm judging whether or not I should intonate differently. I'm judging whether or not you can hear me fine. You're judging whether or not you agree with me. You're judging whether or not I look okay today. You're judging whether or not I'm sitting in a wardrobe or maybe the background is actually a green screen. Judging is a completely normal and a part of our life. It's an instinct that I believe, I know, stems from our self-preservation instinct, right? Like, it's completely normal to judge whether or not someone looks dangerous on the street when you're going past them simply because you want to stay safe. And so we should not refrain from judging, and we should not criticize others for judging when judging is due. Obviously, do not judge lest ye be judged, as it says in the Bible, but that's speaking about a deeper judgment, a judgment of, sort of punishment and serving judicial means. This is not to say that you should not judge someone by the way they look, because you will do it anyway. It's just a part of your instinct. It happens instantaneously, and you should not self-flagellate for that. You should not criticize yourself for that. You should simply accept it and act accordingly. A big part of this is, I believe, that whatever you judge someone to be, do, or have, you act in a manner that would fit the golden rule, right? So the golden rule is act unto others as you would want them to act upon you. And in that space, that's when your judgment should be put aside. But of course, you should stay safe, and your judgment will help you to do so. Now, finally, I wanted to talk with you about this one topic, which certainly is one of the more difficult ones. And I did consider whether or not I should touch upon it, but I think what will be said here ultimately is in no shape or form criticizing anyone in particular. So I would say it's quite a fair approach, and hopefully not cancel culture prone one. There is this discourse in this postmodern thought of the equality of outcome, right? You might have heard this idea of equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity is basically ensuring that everyone gets a fair chance, a fair shot. Maybe in the context of a competition, everyone gets a chance to participate in the competition. And if someone doesn't have, a pair of shoes to run because of their background, then they should be provided a pair of shoes to try. And equality of outcome is this idea that emerged, I assume, from a Marxist thought, later turned into a communist thought in a way, that everyone should be given the same outcome, right? So in the context and the example of a competition, if it's a race, then equality of opportunity allows everyone to participate in the race, and equality of outcome in its extreme form would give everyone the first place. So there are no winners. anymore, right? Everyone is a winner, and so no one is. And there is this quote from Syndrome from Incredibles, which I often mention when discussing these absurdities, I would say, of equality of outcome. Syndrome said, if everyone is super, then no one is. And this is such a huge, true statement, in my opinion. You know, there cannot be everyone on the first place. It simply doesn't work. Then there are no places, and it's not competition anymore. If every podcast would have to be listened by the same amount of people, then there would be no incentive for me and other podcasters to do a good job. And this is to the detriment of the society and the whole market at large and ourselves. It's very disheartening, even if you do not think about it straightforwardly, if you are being awarded first place, whether or not you won. You know, we have, I believe, inside of us a consciousness that knows when something is right and wrong. And this Jiminy Cricket of ours, the one from Pinocchio, knows when we are given an award when it is due, and when we are given praise when it is not due, when it's basically a lie. So, you know, this tendency of diversity, equity, and inclusion versus meritocracy, and this idea that we should not choose the best person for the job, rather we should choose a person for the job based on their color of their skin, their sex, their preference, their, you know, whatever, ultimately leads to us having not the best people in the places where they should be. And how would you feel if you had that? How would you feel if someone were to choose other person for the job when you applied for it, not because they are better than you, rather because they are different than you? You know, in the same way, an extreme example of this is this idea: who would you prefer to defend you in in your country? Would you rather have someone who is a great warrior defend your house, or would you rather have someone defend your house who is not a great warrior? Maybe they are not a warrior at all, but because of this idea of equality of outcome, they've been assigned to defend you, and they don't even know how to use a weapon. You know, obviously, these are just examples, and it is unlikely that your house will have to be defended by a great warrior. But I do believe they point to what the author criticized and highlighted in his work, The Parasitic Mind, that based on some of the faulty ideas and signaling some morals upon which the culture becomes and is built, we are likely to all lose as a society, as a community, as a world community, because if we give everyone the same outcome, then there is no incentive to become better at whatever we do. And over time, you will not have a doctor that knows how to be a doctor that will treat you, but someone who was assigned the role of a doctor simply because they're, the color of their hair or whatever. And I do think that we are on the back end of this mind virus example, this particular one, this equality of outcome as an idea. But we should be stand guard at the doors of equality of opportunity. I truly do believe that this is where the meritocratic and the strong person and a society and community is built. So yeah, these are some of the ideas in the book. Gad Saad explores many more of mind viruses that he considers to be a trouble of our time. And as I said, it's not an easy read, but it's definitely a valuable one. And my my invitation for you this week is to consider, what topics have you consciously refrained from discussing with your close friends, or maybe colleagues at work, or maybe loved ones, and think whether it is best to keep them away or it is best to face them. I don't want you to go out there right now and start offending everyone with your true perceptions. There is no point. I think there is a balance between telling the truth and being unpleasant to others, But I do believe also there are special people in our life who depend on us and on whom we depend, and those people deserve our truth and deserve our honesty and deserve our criticism where criticism is due, and praise when praise is due. It's a big part, right? Like, if you see your loved one going astray, maybe they are overeating to the point that they are not taking care of their health, or maybe they've taken up smoking cigarettes and you know that it's bad for people to smoke cigarettes, or maybe they are about to make a huge mistake with one of the decisions that will affect their life in the long run. It is okay, and I would say it is compulsory, it is your duty to tell them about it. And it will take courage both on your side and their side to face the music, so to speak. And my invitation for you for this week is to consider whether you have some of those topics. And if you don't, then that's great, and you feel blessed, and I'm happy for you. But if there are some topics that you've been refraining of discussing, or maybe with yourself, if there are some spaces in your life that you've been turning the gaze away from because you don't want to face that music, I would urge you to face it. And and I commend you for it, and I hope that it goes well. So yeah, I will put the link below to a few of the episodes of the podcast which are related to what we've discussed today. I will also put a link below to the podcast of the author, as well as the link to the book, so you can purchase it yourself and have a read. I would encourage you to read it. It's definitely a valuable read and definitely up-to-date one. And thank you for sticking around with me. I know that this was a challenging episode. It certainly was challenging for me. So thank you, and I appreciate your time. And I hope that I've done a good job expressing my ideas and conveying the ideas from the book to you. If you do consider this podcast valuable, then don't forget to subscribe, follow the link below, click the follow button, share it with a friend. Do it right now. It will make a great help for me, and I deeply appreciate your time and support. Other than that, as always, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.